This is Mark Guerrero. Welcome to East L.A. Music Stories, episode 29. My guest is Quetzal Flores, who formed the group Quetzal in 1993. His now wife, Martha Gonzalez, now Dr. Martha Gonzalez, joined in 1995. Quetzal has released 9 albums, won a Grammy in 2013, and are known for their social activism. Quetzal plays a mix of Mexican and Afro-Cuban rhythms, jazz, R&B, rock, and incorporate fandango and son jarocho in their music. How you doing, man? Welcome, Quetzal.
Mark, great. Pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, man. So what gave you the idea to form this band? And I assume you were in other bands before this?
Yeah. I grew up in the on the northeast side, Lincoln Heights, El Sereno, and there was always this connection to the east side proper, so East L.A. unincorporated, and also Boyle Heights. And the backyard party scene was a thing, just like it was during your time. And so we got a lot of we cut our teeth, in those spaces, and there was a whole network of houses that would host these backyard parties. And
And were you mainly playing rock and roll at that time, electric instruments?
I was only playing electric guitar, and it was like alternative rock. Yeah, like early alternative rock stuff. And
Who were
so,
some of your early influences for that?
oh man, I mean, so I was a huge Johnny Marr fan. And so I was really into that type of guitar playing, really melodic, a lot of extensions on chords, like really rich harmony. To me, that was really exciting to compose in that way and to play in that way. Um, and a lot of mostly guitar driven stuff, not a lot of keyboard stuff. And so I had a band right before the band Quetzal. I had a band called Aslan, and it was a group of guys from the neighborhood who I grew up with, and we just started playing this band together, and it was all original material, and we did some amazing work, and it lasted a couple of years, and then that was it.
What got you more into the traditional side of Mexican music? How did that happen?
Yeah, I didn't get into that for several years. So even at the beginning of Quetzal, I was just playing electric guitar. Um, I did like bolero music already and was interested in that. And then I met Marcos Loya at
Oh,
a fundraiser for Rudy Acuna at Montezuma Esparza's house in South Pasadena, border of South Pass and El Sereno, but it's actually El Sereno. And I asked him if he would teach me, and so he started to kind of like mentor me in some ways. And through him, I met Lorenzo Martinez Lencho, who you know.
ah, yeah,
And
no,
that's
Lynch
where,
well.
yeah, and that's where, Lencho took me aside and was like, "Hey, Flaco," he says, "I know you like that rock stuff. That's cool, man." He's all, "But I want you to learn your traditional music. You have to learn your traditional music." So Lencho took me under his wing and started teaching me, put the jarana in my hands. He put the bajo sexto in my hands and other traditional instruments. And from that point forward, I started really diving into traditional music. And he provided me a lot of resources like videos that he had collected, recordings. This is the first time I hear Steve Jordan or Mingo Saldivar or like any of these Tex-Mex folks. Um, and then turned me on to a lot of different stuff in the son jarocho tradition as well. And
Yeah,
that was
Lynch was an extremely talented guy. I worked with
this,
him a lot in the late 90s, early 2000s. He did a lot of shows with me and my dad.
yeah.
And we went to Paris, France. He played with us, and
I remember that LA
tremendous
Times
talent.
article. Yeah, I saw that LA Times article, and I already knew him by then, and I remember that trip, and it was for all of us. It was a big deal that Lalo was representing this tradition in Paris and being recognized in that way. Um, we all understood who he was and his contributions, and for us, like any chance we got to either watch him do his thing or actually do stuff with him, it was incredible. And I'll talk about that later. But
Okay.
But yeah, Lencho was really that sort of pathway into traditional music, that got me going. And the jarana in particular was something that took me and had me right away. It just had my attention. It had my spirit, and it transported me into in other universes of possibilities. And so I could immediately hear. And then I was a huge Lobos fan as well, and they had already been doing stuff like this, utilizing the jarana in this really creative way. And so there was a reference already to sort of step into. So all of those things collectively were the moment for me where I was like, oh, like, yeah, this is another resource that I can utilize, and that is part of a legacy of how these musicians did it. Richie did it. Your dad did it before him with Don Tosti and that whole era. And like, there's all these traditional elements infused into this sort of current take on what's happening and how we express it, the articulated reality, or the articulation of our lived reality as Chicanos. And so it was clear to me that I had a role and a responsibility or accountability to this legacy.
Yeah, Los Lobos certainly blazed that trail of, kind of rock and rollers going back to the traditional roots in the early 70s and spawned all the groups since then that have done that. It's
Yeah.
pretty
But
cool.
I'm saying your dad did it too with Chuco
Oh,
Suarez.
oh
And
God, yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like,
he was the first.
yeah, and then Richie did it too. Like, to me, it's really curious to kind of think about that moment of like both your dad, or Lalo, and Richie, and what was happening socially, right? This was a time of great suffering and and struggle, and for him to create songs about and for people that were being persecuted, that is it is absolutely revolutionary. It's a tremendous contribution to humanity. And the same thing for Richie's La Bamba is looked at as something curious because he made a traditional Mexican tune, a rock and roll, into a rock and roll tune. There's a deeper story for me. There is the what was happening socially, Operation Wetback, and that whole thing, and his defiance in the face of like making him change his name in order to make it, in the face of everything that was happening socially, all the hatred, still hangings, like there's still reports of hangings of Mexicans in California, and this dude is like, like, I have a chance to say something, and I'm gonna make a huge statement with this, and I'm gonna stick it to the man. And so to be able to do that at 17 years old was nothing less than also, like I will say, revolutionary. And so I recognize these things in that context, those contributions in these contexts.
I remember that. I mean, I was about 12 years old or so when La Bamba came out, and it was to us in East L.A., Chicanos in East L.A., it was like, holy shit, something in Spanish and rock and roll on the radio was inspired so many people to form bands and pick up guitars, and it was tremendously revolutionary. Getting back to my dad and Los Lobos, I guess one of the differences, Los Lobos were like rock and rollers who went back to the traditional. My dad started with traditional before rock and roll existed. That's what he was. And as rock and roll and pre-rock and roll started happening, he started doing, Muy Sabroso blues and the boogie woogie and pre-rock stuff, and then rock and roll in the early 50s, mid 50s. So he went the other way, but yeah, he was the first, to do it all and to do the bilingual and Euskalo. So
And bridging what we call translocally, right? The Pachucos in Mexico City and the Pachucos here in East LA, like he was one of those bridges between them.
yeah, the first one. As a matter of fact, the Pachucos, as I recall, in Mexico City at the time were called Tarzan because they had long hair like Tarzan.
Yeah.
And my dad had a song called El Pachuco y El Tarzan, the two together, and it was amazing.
Ah, and then like, not to mention his compositions um, that were so relatable in Mexico, right? Like Nunca Jamás, right?
Oh yeah,
Like that was a hit. Like
yeah.
it was a thing. Like people know him from Las Arditas. They know
Right.
him in all these different contexts in Mexico.
And also Canción Mexicana, which is practically like a national
Huge,
anthem.
huge,
So,
right? And
so
so,
he's the first and maybe the only Chicano to have a couple of songs that are standards in Mexico that every mariachi knows on both sides of the border. Pretty
yep, and
amazing.
that's what I'm saying. And also here, like he was relevant on both sides, and that doesn't happen. Even Los Lobos didn't play in Mexico for till like more recently. They had a big show in Mexico City, but before that, it wasn't a thing. Even though people heard their version of La Bamba and like that whole thing, but
Yeah,
we're
it
not.
took a long time for Mexico to accept Chicano, and then groups like Maldita Vecindad came out and Café Tacuba, and they would use Pachuquismo and Calo in their songs, and they started saying Orale, and
Mhm.
it's much better in the last 20 years or so. So when you founded Quetzal, was the idea already to do the mix of everything and bring in the traditional, or how did that happen?
I don't think it was that deliberate. Um, it was more like just having this creative impulse, already writing songs, wanting to write more songs. There was an intention to have a female singer, who the first singer, her name was Lilia Hernandez. And after a couple of years, she decided to go to grad school and didn't want to pursue music in that way anymore. Um, I started the band with a Chicano named Maceo Hernandez, who our parents were in the movement together. They were part of a clandestine national Marxist-Leninist organization called the League of Revolutionary Struggle. We grew up in this environment. Our parents would infiltrate different sectors of society and organize people. My mom, I remember her getting a job at the Ford plant here in Commerce or Vernon down there, right? And then all of a sudden they're on strike, and this would happen frequently throughout my childhood. Is like this thing would repeat itself with both parents. And they were divorced by the time I was 3, but they were in the same organization, and so was my sales mom, and she was part of leadership. And so at 13 years old, Maceo found taiko drums
Mhm.
and became,
Japanese.
yeah, yeah, I became really inspired by that tradition. A prominent group called Ondekosa, they're one of the big groups in Japan, came to do concerts and did some master classes. And he ended up in one of those master classes and then ended up eventually um, getting invited to go join the group in Japan at 13 years old. And his mom let him go. And so he spent, say, 9 years in Japan and went to high school, learned Japanese, and became a master drummer in the tradition and went on tour with them all over the world. And they would do this thing where they would run marathons. They'd go to a marathon, like to whatever city was hosting a marathon, they'd run the marathon and then they'd play a concert at the end. They were incredibly fit and disciplined and like the whole thing, right? And so imagine this Chicano from East L.A. He becomes this part of this group, or like a core part of this group. And then one day he was training and a truck crashed near him and a piece of metal flew and it speared his leg and took his left leg off.
Uh,
And so he ended up having to come back home, 20s, early 20s. And he actually stayed in the group for another year and ran the New York Marathon twice with one leg.
oh my God.
Like, these guys were insane. They were so disciplined and like focused, and then it just became too rigorous for him, and so he decided to come back to East LA. And he was my brother's friend more than my friend, and so my brother was in town, and he was hanging out with him, and then he's like, "Hey," I saw him when they came back from lunch. He's like, "Hey, I heard you're a musician, and blah blah blah, and I want to start a project," and that's how we started Quetzal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, he's an East LA music historian himself. Boy, that's
There's a
a great story.
documentary. There's a documentary about him called Maceo Demon Drummer from East LA.
So you formed the band and you started getting gigs? What kind of gigs were you getting? And was
So
that
at the time, that's a great question. At the time, with the former band, which was called Aslan, we had opened up a relationship with Troy Cafe. And
ah
yeah, and Troy Cafe, as you know, was this Chicano art hub uh, for a while in the early '90s in Little Tokyo, right at the edge of Little Tokyo in Boyle Heights.
Sean Carrillo, right?
And the owner was Sean Carrillo, former OSCO member, and and his partner Bibi Hansen, who was Beck's mom, and that whole
Stepfather of Beck.
there was a whole scene there, right? And so, like, a lot of like the former OSCO people, we'd see there. This is the first time I meet Culture Clash out of there. Eddie Ayala, who just passed away,
He was originally in Los Illegals,
was the
then,
original
then
singer.
Odd Squad.
Odd Squad, Los Illegals, Cactus Flower after that.
That's
So
right.
Eddie I met there, the Gamboas, um, Patsy, like you name it. It was Alice Bag. This is where I first meet Alice Bag and Teresa Covarrubias. And it was a phenomenal space to be in your early 20s.
And I missed that because I had moved to Palm Springs
Yeah,
in 1990. So I
yeah,
wasn't around East LA when that happened. So I missed that whole thing. I heard
yeah,
about it as it was going on and later, but
yeah.
I wasn't able to go there or witness it. But what a hotbed of creativity and renaissance was going on there.
Oh, absolutely. And so this is where we emerge out of, right? And so Aslan was the first band that was starting to play there. So when I formed Quetzal, I just was like, Sean, I got this new project, blah, blah, blah. He's like, bring it. And so we booked a gig, and that's where we would play regularly. And then from there, it just spun out into other stuff, um, including when Culture Clash did Big Top Locals, the first one. Big, and they did that big show. We were the opening band for that show. No one wanted to open it, and I was like, "We'll open it, like gladly, like that's historic." And so we were the first band to perform at Big Top Locals, and it was phenomenal. And it just kept spinning from there. And then when that singer Lilia left, uh, I Marcos had another mentee who would roadie because we'd roadie for him. That's how we'd pay for our lessons. I didn't have money, and so I'd go.
Marcos Loya?
Yeah, I'd go. He'd have a gig at the Baked Potato. I'd go set him up. He'd show up 5 minutes before showtime, and he had his sound up. His guitars were tuned. They're all clean. The band was ready to go, and it was like he just get on stage and go. And then he leaves, and goes and hangs out and parties afterwards. And I break his stuff down. I take it back to his house, and put it away. And then he just, that was the deal.
We
So
should mention before we go on about Marcos Loya that, phenomenal guitar player, wound up teaching at Cal State Dominguez Hills and phenomenal. He was in a Madonna video, but incredible guitar player. What can you say about Marcos besides that?
So Marcos was also part of a really important band during
That's right.
the
80s.
70s and 80s, and that was Califas.
Right.
And didn't have a lot of like any commercial success, but nonetheless incredibly important and part of a scene of bands that were like really infusing, a lot of Cuban and Afro diasporic music into, a different Chicano sound, right? And so he was a tremendous guitar player, both electric and acoustic guitars, and just a creative dude. And he was definitely one of my mentors early on.
And of course, his brother is Willie Loya, who's a
Loya,
percussionist and a really great artist, visual artist.
incredible visual artist and a great cook.
He just did my new album cover too. I don't know if you've seen
I
it.
saw that. I saw
Beautiful
that.
job.
Oh yeah, Willie's a tremendous talent and a great percussionist and he's a beautiful dude.
That's right.
And so these guys are all part of a larger scene with Victor Barrientos and all those guys were hanging out and they created the scene that was back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Now, Califas, didn't they was Quique Rangel,
He was a singer,
female
yeah.
vocalist, and also did Bertha Oropesa sing with them?
Yep.
Two great female singers out of these two.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was a relationship that I had with Marcos, and then Lencho. That's how I met Lencho and Pancho too. I met Francisco Gonzalez through Marcos Loya, who was one of the founders of Los Lobos.
Right.
and who also founded a string shop in Santa Barbara called Guadalupe Custom Strings that continues today. That's owned now by Jacob Hernandez. And so, yeah, so there's all these connections to all these generations. And to me, that's like, now that I'm able to look at it in hindsight, it was an incredible, these are incredible connections and really important connections that ground me and position me in a tradition and in a position of responsibility of holding things and mentoring others, and and also making mistakes
So
because
you
this is
learn.
what we do, right? This is how we learn, right? And so, yeah, so I have a tremendous foundation in terms of who I come from.
So how did Martha come into the mix?
Yeah, so I was saying Marcos had another mentee. His name was Mark Hernandez, and Mark was going to school at UCLA for ethnomusicology, and he had a friend who was going to school there. Her name was Marta Gonzalez, and she was a singer. And so I was like, man, I'm looking for a singer for my band. My singer, she went back to school, blah blah blah. He's like, I know a singer. She's incredible, blah blah blah. He introduces me to Marta Gonzalez. She comes down. We hit it off. We're like, she knows all these boleros that I had just learned. She knows all the rancheras. She knows, like, she has a tremendous foundation in traditional Mexican music. And then, I'm like kind of turning her on to rock and all the stuff, and we just hit it off. And then we started. I had a bunch of songs written already from the first album, and then I kind of was like bringing her into that whole world. And actually, we had a gig at the Alligator Lounge. That was the first gig she played with us, and it was with Lisa Flores and Tito La Riva. Tito and Tarantula played that night. They were the headliner, and it was a great gig. And she enjoyed it, and she was about to move to the Bay Area, but then she thought about it again, and it wasn't until like several months later that anything romantic started happening. But that was like, music was. I was looking for a singer. I found a wife.
Yeah, how long did that take to go from singer to wife? How long was that
Oh,
period?
it was years.
Oh, years, huh?
Yeah, it was years.
And then she went on with her academics and wound up with a PhD.
Yeah, and you'll get to talk to her some other time. I don't want to, get too much into that, but she always had aspirations to continue her education, and we found a moment where it made sense in terms of our musical trajectory, and it was a good time to stop and reflect and kind of like, have other experiences besides the constant touring and recording and that whole cycle that just repeats itself over and over and gets really tiring and old.
What was the first album you did with Martha?
Yeah, it's our first album. It's
That was the
self-titled.
first one. She's on the very first one.
It's called Quetzal, and it's produced by John Avila,
Boingo Boingo.
the bass player from Oingo Boingo. Previously played with El Chicano and all these other bands. He's just a South San Gabriel guy and a part of that scene, which is a whole nother scene, and a phenomenal musician, a great singer, and he's a fantastic producer and a beautiful, beautiful human being. And I learned so much about music production from John, and one of the reasons why I'm able to produce albums now was because of John. Watching him, being able to sit and watch him work and see his, like all that energy and focus he puts into it. And
He's also an engineer, isn't he?
he's a great engineer. Yeah, he does it all. He has his home studio. And so that was the first album, and Martha was on it, and we already had, probably about, let's see, so like 2 years of playing and writing and under our belt together, with the whole band, including Martha. So with Martha came in a bass player named Dante Pascuso, who's my compadre, a drummer named Danilo Torres, Tailana Enomoto, our violinist,
Great.
and and uh, and Gabriel Tenorio, who was also in the band La Slan with me, and then who played with Elvez for a while, and with Las Tres, and like all these other groups. And Gabriel is my childhood friend, and so he was a part of that first album as well, a big part. He's the electric guitar player on that Yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed him, Piero and I, for the Great Day in East L.A. project a few
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have a couple of interesting song titles on that first album, 1998. Tell me about Crooked Cholo.
Yeah. That's a great. So in the band Aslan, our singer was Marco Garcia, and he died, suicide, 21,
Wow.
and it was devastating. He's my close friend, and I was very close to him, still close to his family, the Garcia family, and so he had a performance, an alter ego, like he would do these like impromptu performances, and he was called the Crooked Cholo, right? And he was hilarious. He was really powerful. He was engaging, and he was out there though, you know. And so when he died, I wanted to pay homage to him and the love that I continue to have for him. And so it's like, you know, we get to engage with history in magical ways as magical people that we are. And so the idea was to tell a story of how he actually, from when he jumped from the bridge in downtown,
Holy shit.
he found his wings on his way down, and then, you know, and flew into the heavens, and, like, you know, became this incredible spirit. And so that's how I like to think of him, you know.
One of the bridges between downtown LA and the east side, one of those, wow, symbolic somehow. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. So that the Crooked Cholo, that's the story of him, and you know, the things that he would talk about, you know, migration, regeneration, liberation, you know, like all these things that that are sort of foundational to how I see the world and how I go about my work, right? And we had so much in common, and we're so aligned in all these different ways, and it just, you know, uh, trauma and life and addiction and all these things are real.
Did he
And
have an addiction problem?
he did, yes. Yeah.
Another title that was interesting is Politics y Amor. And that kind of sums up a lot because love and politics, you know, don't seem to go together, but it's kind of, you guys represent both things too.
Yeah, they absolutely go together. And so, you know, the whole Che Guevara quote, he says, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, at the heart of any revolutionary is love, right?
Mhm.
And this is right, a love for humanity, a love for the earth, a love for,
Freedom.
yeah, you know, for liberation, for dignity, you know, whatever it is, like, you know, these acts of defiance, these acts of refusing an unlivable destiny are rooted in love, for ourselves and each other. And so this song, Politics y Amor, is my upbringing, is my, like, this is how I exist in the world. It is my embodied experience,
Mhm.
right? I saw my parents and how they fought and continue to fight for justice, and to see how much they care and how much they love and feel. And so, you know, and it's told through like a love story, you know. But what it really is, you know, us as a community and society, you know, like, hey dreamer, this is real life, you know. And so, like, constantly being told that you're a dreamer, and that you know, and that your dreams will never come to fruition because you're not a part of the machine, or a part of, you're not playing the game,
Yeah.
you know, the way it's been designed, and instead you're making your own rules. Like, I've always had this affinity with the moon, and connection to the moon, and I was named the name of a bird. And so
Mm.
that's like the whole, where
That's
where the moon get high, you know, meet me at the edge of life. And like how we live, like we live at the edge of life. We live at the edge of so many things. As Chicanos, we're so innovative and cutting edge, and, you know, challenging things in a way that is bringing up really critical questions in the world, and we continue to do so, right? And that allows us to connect to other communities, like Palestine, for example. This is, you know, there's no, it's not a secret that we've always had those affinities, or with, Native communities or the Zapatistas or whatever revolution is going on in the world. Like this is part of our understanding, and we're watching it happen, and we're like, or any genocide, we're like that, that's us, and we're connected to that.
Speaking of Quetzal, were your parents, I don't know your exact age, but were your parents, I'm guessing your parents were they baby boomers? Were they kind of grew up late 60s or part of the Chicano movement in the
Yeah, yeah.
60s?
So they were born in the late 40s.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, yeah,
So it was not uncommon for Chicanos in the late 60s or early 70s to name their kids something very indigenous or, you know,
yeah. That's exactly right. And the reason is that they wanted us to know that there was an indigenous, past or indigenous connection,
right,
and that, yeah, okay, well, you're gonna get your Spanish name, right? And there was a colony, there was a genocide, there was all these things, and yet you still have an indigenous name. You still have a right to that indigenous history and present, that you still exist as an indigenous person. And so that name has always given me sort of like, a a sort of impulse to trace that history and to look, and it's a Nahuatl name, but my people weren't the Nahuatl people, but still it's the same sort of
related.
idea, and it led me to understand my roots even deeper, for both my dad's family, who's from Jalisco, and my mom's family that's from Zacatecas, but they're all within the region of what the Huichol people.
Oh, well, interesting. The Huichol. Well, I have a few pieces from the Huicholes here, back here.
Yeah, yeah, magical people.
And they were kind of into psychedelics, I mean, look at
Yeah.
this is a real Huichole beaded
Yep.
thing.
Oh yeah.
And this, you can
Yeah.
open it up and put stuff in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they were incredible. I mean, it's very psychedelic.
For real.
Yeah, well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's just as a little device here, why don't we kind of go through the albums and any other stories that come up in between, we can do that.
Sure. Sure.
But so second album was Sing the Real 2002,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of titles that got my attention. One of the titles is Social Relevance of Public Art. That's a song title.
Yeah, that is a song title. So yeah, the social relevance of folk art was because you know um, we were a part of a movement, of a, like you said, like a renaissance of art and culture, and Osomatli comes out of that, and Aslan Underground, and the Blues Experiment, and Olin, and like all these tremendous bands. But then there were the visual artists, there were the poets, there were the photographers, and I think that we were all grappling with this question: is like, what is what is the function of art, right? And we just came from an era where it was like art for art's sake, and like a real effort to invest in an industry, or to be a part of an industry, to get a piece of the pie or whatever it was, right? And that wasn't what we were trying to do. And so what is the actual relevance of art that belongs to the people, right? And this is the name that it had at the time, was public art, right? And so and so how do we do it? Like, what is, and so this is just us saying, like, this is what we're thinking about right now, right? Social relevant of public art is, in my mind, again, accountable to who is where we begin. Like, if you can root yourself in that question, is like, who is your accountability to? Well, my accountability is to my people and my community, right? And not to a record company or a particular market, and so that question will keep me safe. It will keep me focused on having the impacts that I want to have with music and art and culture, right? And it'll keep me grounded. And so that's what that song's about.
That whole relevance, the whole renaissance, that really started like late 60s East LA, as far as in East LA.
Yeah.
And because when I was part of that early 60s East LA sound, there wasn't the social activism and politicizing and the
Sure.
It was just us playing rock and roll, surf, rhythm and blues, British invasion. In the late
Right.
60s, when the Chicano movement came up, right at that time, the music got more socially relevant, and the art scene came up with Carlos Almaraz and the Los Four, and then later with Willie Heron and Osco and Gronk and Patsy Valdez. And
Oh, no
so
doubt.
since the late 60s through East LA, there's always been that marriage of art and all the arts, music and having a social activism attached to it. It's beautiful.
Absolutely. Oh, and we're wholly aware of that. I'm not claiming I'm not claiming it. It was just our time and our renaissance. You know what I mean?
But it's always continued. That's what I love.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And we're like we're students. Like we study that shit. We knew who Asco was. We knew all the bands, during that period. We understood who the punks were and what they contributed and like, and what their sort of mm, their line was, and for us it was these were all the inspirations we were drawing from like, but all the way back, like we could go back to, because even if, you know this is what I was saying about Lalo earlier, is like, even if it wasn't explicitly said, you don't have to, like, when you're singing about pachucos, like you're positioning yourself, against imperialism, against, the brutality of a people, and for, people to be able to create something, well, the word rascuache.
Yeah.
Okay, so rascuachismo, right, is this idea that you have to be infinitely resourceful. And in being infinitely resourceful, you become incredibly innovative, right? And this is our people. And so when Lalo sings about, pachucos, or when, like I mentioned earlier, like Richie sings La Bamba, like these are not blatant, like outright political songs as much as they are political
Right.
acts.
Right. But, I'm glad you brought that up about my dad because, yeah, my dad was doing it before that Renaissance of the late 60s in the way you say, but
Yeah.
also he had songs about the farm worker movement, about Cesar Chavez,
Dude,
about, Ruben
yeah.
Salazar being
El
killed.
corrido de Rubén
He was,
Salazar. We
he
just
was
covered
doing
that.
that,
Yeah.
in the 50s and 60s. So he had his ear to the ground and he was just aware of what was going on and wrote about it.
Absolutely. And then later on, like he like there were more popular songs of his that he did, like, No Chicanos on the TV, or No Chicanos.
Funny songs. Yeah, it's funny songs. No Chicanos on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but, really relevant and still relevant today, man.
He
It's
sang
like,
about tortillas. There's no tortillas, man.
oh man,
It's very
that's
important.
that song. That song reminds me of my kid. We lived in Mexico for a year when he was 2 to 3 years old, and then we moved to Seattle. And there's like one place you can find tortillas in Seattle, and it was at the time, and it was called, they were the Guerrero ones, right?
Oh yeah.
And so my son was used to handmade tortillas in Mexico, because we would go buy them from the mercado every day, and they would be these handmade tortillas, and they were organic corn and like the whole thing. And so the first day in Seattle, I serve him a tortilla, and he's like, "What's this?" And I was like, "That's a tortilla." And he's 3, right? He's like, "That's not a tortilla."
He knew.
I was like, "It is." He's like, "No, it's not. What happened to the ones that we used to eat?" I was like, "Oh, those are made by hand." He's like, "Yeah, I want those." I was like, "We don't have those here."
And the
So
Guerrero Tortilla Company, we have nothing to do with that.
so then I
My
started
family.
singing. I started singing him. There's no
Mm,
tortilla. There's only bread, right? And so he was just looking at me like, "What is that?" And we crack up about it now. But yeah.
right. Cool. There's another song on that Sing the Real album called Sesontle. Did that have anything to do with the group Los Sesonles, or what is that
It
about?
did actually. We were, touring around and doing all these things, and we got invited to go and play with them, and those kids were so inspirational, and what they were doing, and how they were doing it, and you have to give credit to Eugene. He did a lot of work, and
Rodriguez.
yeah, and we so when we came back, it was like, just reflecting on what the sensontle is, a mockingbird, right? And so it doesn't have its own song necessarily. It sings songs of other birds. And so to me, that was really um, impactful and symbolic of what it means to hold accountability in community, right? When I'm saying something, when I'm making a decision as an organizer, I'm not making the decision for myself. I'm carrying a group of people in my decision, and I'm caring for and I'm considering everything that they've said to me and shared with me, and their needs, what they've expressed as their needs. And so when you're writing songs, like that's, you can also position yourself in that way. And this is the case in the song Sensontle. And so it's asking the bird, hey, little bird, like, what's your song? And then the bird says, I sing songs, happy songs. I sing painful songs, like the valley. I repeat whatever I hear. And what I'm hearing is that we should organize without fear, right? And so this bird just keeps, repeating back all the things that it's hearing. And this is during, 2002. So you're talking about already 8 years into wait, 94, 8 years into the Zapatista movement, right? And, well, actually 7 years, because we wrote it earlier and then it, got recorded. But um, so yeah, so like this bird is just looking around and repeating and becoming the echo for the people, right? And that was our job, is to take this information and then push it out in these creative ways.
Cool, man. That's a good idea. Okay, then 2003, Work Songs. What was that album about?
The album or the song?
Oh, well, both.
Yeah.
The
So
song
that was,
triggered the album, maybe.
oh yeah, and I should mention that Sing the Real was produced by Greg Landau,
Oh, okay.
who
Big
is,
Bay Area producer.
yeah, yes, he's also a very close friend, another mentor, someone that I got to watch very closely and learned so many things from. And who, Greg Landau, I should mention, was a Sandinista. He went
Oh,
to
wow.
Nicaragua to fight.
Whoa.
He's half Nicaraguan, half Jewish. His dad was Saul. His mom is Nicaraguan. He goes and he's like, he was a San Francisco activist, musician. He was like, oh, I'm going to go down there and fight for my people. He goes to Nicaragua. He starts fighting as a Sandinista. Becomes they find out he can play music, so he becomes a part of a really prominent group in the revolution. They were called Mancotal. And so he is playing tres and a Cuban guitar, right? And he's playing guitar and he's doing these things, but they're out there fighting. He told me an incredible story that they would be out fighting, and that a certain part of the day there was an agreement between the Contras and the Sandinistas that the fighting would stop. People would come out into a clearing, and without their military, they'd change. Everybody be eating, and Mancotal would play, and people would just be dancing, and like there was no fighting, there was no engaging in that way. And then that the time would stop and everyone would go back into the bush, and it would be like on again.
Amazing.
Incredible. So Greg has all kinds of stories.
Wow.
Because he's Saul's son, he also has incredible documentation. There's a picture of him in the Sierra Maestras in Cuba, in a Jeep, in the back seat of a Jeep. His dad's in the back of the Jeep. He's there with a camera, little Greg. His dad has a cigar. Fidel is right in front of his dad with the cigar.
Whoa.
And then Raul is driving the Jeep. And this was his dad. His dad is a national hero in Cuba. Passed away, and did a documentary on Fidel, and Fidel, he was really close to Fidel. And so Greg grew up in this environment. Was in Jamaica during the whole Civil War in Jamaica, the whole Michael Manley thing, and got to go with his dad up into the hills where Michael Manley was hiding out, and all the Black Jamaicans were hiding him out, and to interview him, right? So he has this tremendous history, and so that was really attractive to us as a band. Like, there's this fucking
I
revolution.
had no idea about that. I met him one time, a musician, a Bay Area musician named Marcos Lopez, I believe his name. He took me to Greg's studio and I met him, and I had no idea he had this part of his story. Did they ever write a book about him, or is there a documentary?
No, I want someone to do it, right? Like I wish someone would do it because this guy is he's a tremendous resource. He's so generous. He's done so he is such a huge resource for Bay Area musicians and has done so many incredible projects. Um, and for us it was like, oh man, this guy worked with Susana Vaca. Oh, he worked with Pancho Quinto. Oh, he worked with Afro-Cuban, like all these different artists, right? And he doesn't get the credit he deserves really because he is brilliant. He's a brilliant producer and he's a great musician too. And so that was the second album. So
So when did you guys get, was this all pre-Vanguard Records?
that was Vanguard.
That was the first Vanguard?
Yeah, the very very first album I forgot to mention was funded by actually two mentees of my father's. They were part of the same organization, the League of Revolutionary Struggle. Their name is Chris and Gina, and they started a record company called Son del Barrio, and they put out two records. One was ours, and then the second one was this group called Los Otros, which was Chris's band with Russell Rodriguez and all these other guys. And so Son del Barrio was it was like an independent nonprofit, record company, and it put us on the map. It really did. And then Vanguard Records signed us to a 3-album deal.
How'd you get that hookup? By the way, Vanguard Records is a major folk label. Joan Baez was on it. Big
Yeah.
time.
Oh, we know the history of that too, and they were the ones putting out blacklisted artists back in the 60s.
Wow.
That's how it got started. There was all these blacklisted artists, and they were like, "Oh no, we're gonna put them out." And similar to
What gave you the hookup with them?
so there was one of the marketing guys there. His name was Vince Hans, and Vince was a huge fan of the band, and he was like, he heard that we were looking for a label, and he was like, "Hey, I'm interested in signing you guys," and blah blah blah. Like they're letting me do A&R stuff now, and so he went and he got us signed to the label, and it was a great deal, and we recorded Sing the Real first, and that was with Greg, and they didn't interfere with anything musically. Like, it was mostly like, okay, how you guys want to do this? And then, really measuring how they were going to support us, through the marketing money and whatever.
How many albums were on Vanguard?
Two.
Which ones were those?
Sing the Real and Work Songs.
Okay.
And then, so Work Songs, you asked about Work Songs. Work Songs is a year later, 2003, and we were really a really well-oiled machine, and we were writing songs all the time. A couple new members. By Sing the Real, we had new members, and by Work Songs, we had also new members. So my cousin Rocio started playing violin with us for Sing the Real, and so did Ray Sandoval, guitar player, and then a drummer named Kiko Cornejo, whose dad is Kiko Cornejo Sr., who had a band called Storm in San Diego, and was a prominent band there, and part of the movement as well. And so Kiko Jr. was our drummer, and then we had a percussionist named Edson Gianesi from Brazil who went to Cal Arts with some of the musicians in the band, and it was a great band. And so when we got to Work Songs, actually Ray left, the guitar player, so I was the only guitar player, and then our bass player Dante played some guitar as well. But that album was produced by Steve Berlin. And so we had a gig with Los Lobos at the Greek when we were with Son del Barrio, and so this is our first introduction to them. We hadn't really met them yet. We were huge fans, but we opened for them at the Greek, and then there was another gig somewhere, and we got to connect with Steve, and so we were like, "Hey, like we want you to produce our album." Oh no, that's not what happened. It wasn't a gig. Ozo was doing their second album, which was Embrace the Chaos, and Steve was producing it, right? And so we got to see him in action. He produced two songs. He produced this song called El Tímido for Ozo, and he produced another song called Mi Alma. And so, or maybe it was 3 songs. I don't remember, but you can find that information out. So then I hit him up there and I was like, dude, produce our next album, please. And he's like, let's do it. And so we worked it out, and then we got into rehearsals and we did the whole thing. We usually rehearsed for 3 months consecutively, 8 hours a day, leading up to an album. That was our whole method. And so we had written the songs, and we were doing rehearsals, and then he came down. We kind of finalized the arrangements and everything, and we got into the studio. And I should mention that we also started working with Robert Carranza at this time, who's an engineer, legendary engineer now, and who's also from the East Side. And, he's the homie. Guy's a legend, and he's just such a tremendous resource and also very generous. And so that was the team. It was Robert on engineer, Steve producing, and then the band. And we had a great time. We had a great time. This is also the beginnings of our relationship with the folks in Veracruz, the whole fandango movement in Veracruz. And
Son jarocho.
yeah, so the son jarocho scene or movement, because it really was a movement of music and culture and movement of resistance. And Ramon, who I became very close to, I'm still very close to, is one of my best friends. He had a group called Son de Madera at the time. And every band in East LA was completely obsessed with Son de Madera. And I had gotten an album from one of my other mentors named Russell Rodriguez from San Jose. And I burned it for everybody. I just burned copies left and right. Like I must have burned hundreds of copies. And so everybody had a copy of this, and we were all freaking out about this. And so when we got a chance to finally meet them, it was like, oh, this is like meeting the Beatles for me. It really was. And so I invited Ramon to play on it, and he plays on the song called Limones Agrios, which is about my grandfather's death, which was a pretty phenomenal situation, right? We knew he had cancer. He was a man of deep faith, and many priests, including Father Greg Boyle, Mike Kennedy, these revolutionary theologists, right? My grandfather was revolutionary too. This is my mom's dad. They came to give mass at his house.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was born on January 6th, and so like 3 different priests came to give. And then like one of my tias, who's also very Catholic, she was like, it was like the 3 kings, and like, oh, right. And so on his deathbed, he waited. He waited for the priest, for Mike Kennedy to get there. He asked, before he went into a coma, he asked, when is the priest coming? This was like on a Saturday. My grandma said Wednesday. This dude waited it out, and like he could barely make noise. Like you'd go and say, "Grandpa, it's me," blah 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 blah, blah, and he'd be like, but he was still there, and barely hanging on. And so the priest gets there, gives him his last rites. We start to sing his favorite boleros. He loved La Barca. He loved Gema. He loved Cerca del Mar, and Mi Viejo San Juan, like all these boleros. And so like by this time we're all seasoned musicians. Marta's there singing her ass off, right? And the whole family singing to him. And then the priest turns to us and he's like, he's gone.
Whoa.
And then we just kept singing and crying, of course, but just kept singing to him like, we're going to send you off right.
He hung on, he waited, and then he went during the music blissfully. Fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Yes, exactly. And so the song really talks about, he had 11 children. He worked in the lemon packing house for many years. He worked for Sunkist in Oxnard, and yeah, he's just a tremendous man, and just a pillar of my family and my life for sure.
So was it when you got the Vanguard deal? Is that when you first started kind of touring? Mostly?
We were already touring before then. Mostly,
first album?
Yeah. From the first album, we were touring. It was mostly like California, some Arizona stuff, some New Mexico stuff, like Southwest mostly. And then from Vanguard, it was like we got onto Monterey International I'm sorry, it was back then. It was Monterey. It was Monterey, I think, the agency. And so we were on the same agency as Los Lobos, so we started to get paired up with them a lot. We started to get paired up with Taj a lot, Taj Mahal. We started to get paired up with Little Feat a lot. We're all
Wow.
part of the same agency, and so we toured with all those bands quite a bit for several years.
Beyond the United States or mainly in the United States?
United States, Canada, mostly. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow.
Mhm. It was incredible. Yeah.
So we already took care of work songs in that album. You want to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I love this title of an album, 2006, Die Cowboy Die. The hell's that about?
So yeah, this is like, this is Bush. This is like that whole the whole warmongering. This
Mm.
is, being tired of this fucking American cowboy mentality, uh, you know, plaguing us. And it came from a Noam Chomsky statement where he's like, if you go to any country in Latin America, you see soldiers with machine guns at every corner. He's like, this is to remind people that they better stay in line, or there are going to be consequences. He's
Right.
like, here in the United States, we don't need that soldier because we have it burnt into our psyche right here. It's constantly. And so the concept of Die Cowboy Die was to kill that cowboy in our psyche and to liberate ourselves into other worlds of possibilities, and also worlds of defiance, right?
The John Wayne persona.
Yeah, fuck him. But like Chuck D said, or it's actually Flavor Flav says, uh, you know, oh wait, no, he says it about Elvis. But John Wayne was the same, simple and plain. Oh yeah, that's what he says. Elvis was a hero to some, but never meant shit to me. The motherfucker was racist and plain. Fuck him and John Wayne. Love it. Public Enemy.
There you go. So on that album, you had a song called Migra and Deportee. Is that the one, the Woody Guthrie Deportee?
It's a take on the yeah. Basically like a Woody Guthrie cover, a piece of it, like just a short piece of it.
Mm.
And that comes from actually me working with the Latino Theater Company, and Jose Luis Valenzuela and Evelina Fernandez and Sal Lopez and all those folks, those beautiful people. And Marcos, they wanted Marcos to be the musical director of this play they were doing, raising funds against Proposition 187. And so, and the play was La Víctima, which was Teatro de la Esperanza from Santa Barbara, and this beautiful play. And so Marcos was like, I can't do it, but my mentee's going to do it. And so he's like, you're going to be a musical director. And I was like, what? I don't know how to do that. And he just put me in line, and I did a job, and I did a good job. I was very dedicated. And this is where Jose Luis Valenzuela taught me the song Deportee.
Great song. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to reference that, and just, you always want to weave in all the different moments. And so we had written the song called Migra already. And so I wanted to kind of just bookend it with on this side with a reference to like the fact that this shit's been going on and on and on.
Regarding Woody Guthrie, last summer, I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma to
Yeah.
go to the new Bob Dylan Center. I don't know if you know about it. It's a major museum. And right next door is the Woody Guthrie Center, which is equally incredible.
Yep.
They're just bookends. They work perfectly together. And wow, to see the Woody Guthrie Museum too was amazing. I mean, his whole history of social activism, of, just being the right kind of person, and, not being a racist. And he was doing all the right things. He was Bob Dylan before Bob Dylan,
Oh, Woody Guthrie was the real deal. He was not messing around.
No, no.
And he wasn't just not racist. He was proactively fighting
Oh,
for
absolutely.
for
Equality and diversity.
and calling that shit out. Like when
Absolutely.
old man Trump, like calling it out. It's like, this is a fucking Nazi. This is a fascist.
Right.
So
His
yeah,
guitar said, "This machine kills fascists."
straight up. Like Woody Guthrie was the real deal. He didn't die a wealthy man.
No.
He was a very, very calculated and disciplined uh, person. And yeah, man, one of my
Very
favorites.
inspirational. I put up a video on that trip. If you just look up on YouTube, Mark Guerrero, Tulsa musical visit or whatever, it's all there.
I'd love to check it
It
out.
was very inspiring. Um, there's another song title on Die Cowboy Die, and it just got my eye. Mamadas y cochinadas. A deal with that.
That's a saying. So Juan, our bass player, he's he is such he has a way with words, and so whenever he didn't like something, he would say "mamadas y cochinadas," right? Like it's a bunch of fuckery, right? And so uh, and so we loved it, and he brought in that's him playing guitar. He's playing that guitar piece, and I love interludes. I'm a big fan of interludes. I love Pink Floyd. I love the Beatles. And there's always these interesting interludes in their music, particularly Pink Floyd. And so I decided that this is the first album I produced for the band, because I hadn't produced for the band before that. It was always, like I mentioned, Steve, Greg, John, and so this is the first one I produced, and I wanted it to be, and I with John actually co-produced it, and so I wanted it to be something that had a signature sound, and so I challenged everybody to do interludes, and so Juan came in with this guitar piece, and then Marta was like, "Oh, I want to put something on top of that," and then I turned the mic on, and we started to mess around, and Juan was there, and so she started singing "Mamadas y Cochinadas," and she just put all these this whole vocal landscape on top of what he had done. That is just incredible, and it was so much fun, and we were just having a blast being musicians and being creative and and just trying to be as free as possible in our expression. And so
Fantastic. Wow. So the next record, Imaginaries 2012, is that what you got a Grammy for?
yeah, so that one is that's Smithsonian Folkways release. So that's not an independent release. And that one is interesting because we had met Dan Sheehy, who was the head of the Smithsonian Folkways at the time, through my mentor Russell Rodriguez, and we had a relationship, and we would go to the Folk Life Festival every year and be presenters. Like we'd be on the stage presenting other artists. We would do some stuff where we'd be like the dance stage, and we do like a son jarocho thing, or like jam with other artists or whatever. But ultimately, Dan, saw something in us and was like, "Hey, would you guys be interested in doing a Folkways album?" And we had, like I said, we're always writing. So I had a bunch of songs in the can already, and in the demo form. And so he's like, "If you have any stuff to send me." So I sent him a bunch of stuff, and he's like, "Please, let's do a record." And so I said, "Okay," put the budget together, blah, blah, blah. We were living in Seattle at the time. Martha was getting her PhD. And so we flew up, a couple of the band members, Juan and Quincy McCrary at the time, who started playing with us on Die Cowboy Die. He's a phenomenal singer, keyboard player, comes from the Black church traditions and R&B and all these other things. And his family was a band called the McCraries back in the 70s that used to tour with the Jacksons and all these things. So Quincy's a bad dude. So they flew up, and then we got some work done. They went back. I did more and more, and then finally we came to LA and we recorded the album. And the Folkways folks met us here. And again, like now this is the one I produced all by myself and I engineered a lot of it too, and it was a departure for many reasons. There's not a lot of drum set on this one. In the previous albums, it's mostly drum set, and I wanted to kind of depart from the drum set for a little while and like use percussion and play with percussion as like that, like foundational instrument. And then my cousin had left right before Die Cowboy died, the violinist, and Tailana comes back. Our original violinist comes back on Imaginaries. and then she brought along a cello player with her, and then we also had a different percussionist at the time. Some of the old band members came back and played on this one as well. It was like 40 different musicians played on it, so it was really fun. Um, Great studio vibes. There's a lot of, you can find stuff online about it. Um, for me, like some of the best moments, like the song "Imaginaries" is Juan on a cigar box guitar called the Turbo Diddley. It's this guy named Kurt Shane, it's spelled Schoen, and and Juan brought two pieces in with that Turbo Diddley, and so one of them is the title track "Imaginaries," and that is about, you know, like finding these new ways of and new possibilities for people in in what our future looks like, right? Not being beholden to the idea of reform, or that somehow some politician is going to be voted in that's going to change things for everybody, and like that. No, that we have to do work and we have to imagine it. And if we can imagine it, then we can build it. And, you know, the lyrics say a shift, a surge, uh, um, a shift, a surge, we feel and manifest, slide from uncertainty and lunge into intent, interminable imaginaries, guided by ancestors' strength, abide by no one's government, we below and to the left. And below and to the left is how the Zapatistas sign off every time they communicate with the world.
Mm.
And if you're in your head, below and to the left is your heart, right? And so, and that's a very indigenous thing that they utilize.
I hadn't heard that. That's great.
Yeah.
So you won the Grammy for Best Latin Pop Rock or Urban Album. And did you go to the ceremony?
We did. I didn't want to, and it made me go. And we were sitting in the back, like way in the back, because I imagined Anna Tijoux was going to win. She's my friend now, but I was a big fan of hers, and I was like, oh, she's going to win. And Carla Morrison was also nominated, and I was like, okay, if she doesn't win, Carla's going to win. So we sat way in the back, and then they brought up the category, and we were just like, oh, okay. And then they're like, oh, the guy mispronounced our name. He said Quetzal.
Oh,
He mispronounced the name of the album. He said Imaginaries, right? And it's Quetzal Imaginaries. And so we didn't know what was going on. And we were just sitting there. And then on the screen, our album cover comes on. And we're like, oh, shit. And so if you watch the video, it takes forever for us to get on stage. And then we got excited because all the musicians in the band are like, you know, the cats, like the guys, you know. And so we were like, oh my God, there's so and so, and there's, you know, and we were like waving at them, and then they're like, no, over here, come over here. And so it's a whole hilarious scene. But yeah, we went, and then, you know, went through the whole process of getting interview after interview after interview afterwards, and then, you know,
well, cool, man. Fantastic. You got that. The next album, Quetzal Animales. Did the Pink Floyd give you that idea about the animals, or what?
No, actually, my good friend Akira Bach, who's a filmmaker, he's the one that has done the majority of our music videos. He's actually making a documentary about the band right now. Um, he's from San Juan Bautista. He grew up right next door to Teatro Campesino, and so he's, you know, has a lot of Chicano in him. He's half Japanese, half Hungarian, but he's super Chicano in the way he does his thing. And so we were sitting there one day, and he was like, you know, we're just having a meal and talking. He's like, sometimes when I engage in a project, like I put parameters, and those parameters actually help me be creative, because I have to work within those parameters and figure out ways to stretch these ideas, you know, to the limit or to those parameters. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so we started talking amongst the band, and then we were like, oh, let's do it. And oh, the other thing is the son jarocho is a huge influence on us, obviously. And the son jarocho, because of its where it's born out of, which is indigenous and Black people, is deeply tied to nature. So a lot of the themes are about nature, you know, about animals, about birds, about, you know, but it's also about liberation and about, like, you know, um, land and all these different things, but told through the story of these animals or natural things, right? And so we were like, well, what if we do an album about urban animals, right? Animals that we find in the city. And so we started to do research. We found coyotes, you know, we found owls, and we found pigeons and ants and insects and things like that, right? And so we started to squirrels, and so we started to really dig in and find out things about these animals, and so and then applying like our own reality into this, weaving it into the themes, right, of these animals, and trying to be as creative as possible. And so that's how that whole album was written. And yeah, some great contributions by all the band members, and then Marta with her, you know, her
And
unique
cool song titles. You have Hormiguitas Divinas,
divine.
Divine Ants.
And so that's about the ants working together, and their ant hill was destroyed by a storm, and they come out and they assess, and they're like, okay, like this is the work we got to do, and then everyone comes together and they build it, they rebuild it, right? And they build it for each other and for future generations, and so on and so forth. And so that's the ants.
And you got Coyote Hustle, Spider's Lament, Ardilla, speaking of my dad, a Bossa Nova Ardilla, squirrel.
Yeah, so Ardilla is about a hoarder. It's about actually family of hoarders, and like the impacts of the camps on Japanese Americans, and how many people ended up hoarding because they were so impacted by that experience. It was so devastating that you know, they never wanted to be without, and so turned to hoarding to kind of soothe that wound.
As the squirrels collect all the acorns.
Yeah, totally, exactly. Hoarding nuts, you know, and so and you hear it like, you know, it's like when she sings, you know, happy, I feel so happy. Like the harmony underneath is just tearing at your heart. It's pulling on your heartstring, you know. Oh, with my things, uh, this and that, you know, happy, oh so happy. I gotta have it, you know. And so, so yeah,
And what did that come out independently, or was that on
I was
Smithsonian?
independent as well. And that was a year after Imaginaries. That was 2013, I think. Yeah.
I love the title of album number 7, 2017. By the way, Quetzal Animales was 2014. 2017, The Eternal Get Down. That's a
Yeah.
very cool title.
So that's, yeah, that's a moment where like this is the beginning of the broadcasting of the murdering of Black people in this country. And and also um, the murder of the Ayotzinapa, the 43 in Mexico. And so all this stuff that was happening that was like right in our faces, um, and being broadcast. And so the question was like, okay, like we've had all these moments of movement, and like, what does movement look like now, right? And is it, and where do we fit? And so like anything, like movement has gotten co-opted or canonized in a way, like, oh, it looks like this, and it looks like marching on the street, and it like, okay, that was a moment, yes, absolutely, and it can still manifest in that way, and there are many other ways in which it can happen now that we're not utilizing, that we're not resourcing. And so um, the lyric for the song that has the title in it, um, what's the name of the song? I don't even remember. But it says, you know, beyond the picket and the boycott uh, that will be abated, or how do we like? Oh my God, the lyric is escaping me. That all of these deaths are interrelated. Emmett, like Emmett Till, right? Uh, Emmett. There's somebody else's name in there. Guerrero, which is the Ayotzinapa, and Brown, Michael Brown. How do we initiate our people into the eternal get down, right? And so a get down is a party, is like a, you know, it's celebratory, but it's like, you know, like we also know that in the hood, like let's get down to business, you know? And so it has all these significance and meanings for Black and brown people in particular. And so how do we engage in the eternal get down where we don't exhaust ourselves, you know, mm, doing some sort of activist work. Like the things that we do have to be regenerative. They have to provide us sustenance. They have to provide us, you know, with something that's going to give us life and not exhaust us, not extract from our bodies. And, you know, like we end up, there's a great quote by a, an academic and or organizer slash activist. His name is Robin D.G. Kelly. He's at UCLA in Black Studies. Guy's amazing. And he wrote a book called Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination. And he says, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to tear down. We end up cynical and rudderless. And we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever tactics and maneuvers, but a process that will and must transform us. And so I think that the eternal get down is that question of how do we get to the transformation, right, in perpetuity, so that we can get to that other thing, right? And that other thing inherently speaks against that thing. But as long as we sit and try to fight and fight and fight and fight, we're not going to get anywhere because this thing is so massive and beyond us. It also invokes Audre Lorde's, you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? And so we're thinking about all these things, and so that's how the eternal get down comes out.
There are many ways to move forward, you know, besides just fighting or protesting.
And if we're gonna fight, like let's fight to build a thing that we want, right?
Something lasting.
And that is sustainable, absolutely.
Amazing. You have a title on that album called Mama Nahual. You know, Nahuals are interesting people in indigenous cultures.
Yeah, and that's about, you know, again, all these children. These are people's children that are being taken away, and it's a mother who invokes her animal spirit and turns into a bear and starts destroying the city and just starts attacking and destroying cop cars and tanks, and like she's this super bear, right? And it's all because she heard her child's cry and she knew what was happening. She knew that her child was in danger and was being murdered by the police or the
Became
military.
Godzilla.
Yeah, basically. And so these are dreams that we have.
Exactly. You also did a version of La Bamba. Did you do it something in a different way?
Yeah, this is interesting because it actually comes out because a friend of mine, Sochi Dorsey, she's a filmmaker and a producer, and she was living in New York at the time, and she was working on an HBO film about Latin music and the influence of Latin music on popular culture. And so they wanted to do La Bamba as one of those songs. And so she was like, can you guys do something? And I was like, oh, absolutely. So we created this arrangement of La Bamba that kind of moves it into this whole like other, because like, you know, if you take the traditional La Bamba and then you take like the original La Bamba that was in fandangos and like was not recorded, and then you get the recordings when RCA and you know, CBS and whoever was in Mexico and recording all those albums at the time into, you know, Richie and Trini. Did your dad record La Bamba? He might have recorded La Bamba at some point.
I don't think so.
Okay. So all those recordings of La Bamba
Tony
after that.
Lopez and Los Lobos.
Yeah, and then those Lobos later. And so we were like, okay, well, let's like this is kind of like a rite of passage. Let's record La Bamba, but let's do it our way. And so we did a new arrangement of La Bamba. But then I had the idea for this special. I was like, why don't we call Los Lobos and see if they'll do it with us? And so we set up on stage at Casa de Mexicano in Boa Heights, and Los Lobos was here. We were on this side of the stage. And so if you listen to our La Bamba, it is taking off where they left off, right? And that was the idea. It's like, we want to take where they left off, and then we're going to take it somewhere else. And so they played La Bamba, and then, bamba, 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 da, 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 and so we started there. They stopped. We started, and then we took it into this whole other place. And then at some point, we bring it back, or we don't bring it back, but we like move it into like this, like, psych rock thing. And then they jumped in again, and they came back, and then it was us both jamming together, and then we end, and then it just kind of like dissipates into bamba, bamba, in this really sweet sort of way. And so it was Dave and Marta doing their thing. And then we stopped, and we had invited the fandango community as well. And so we all got off stage, Los Lobos and us, and planted ourselves in a fandango. And then like La Marisol was there, like all these folks that practice fandango were there, and we just started jamming, and we just played and played and played together around the tarima and the dancers and the whole thing. And so it was like bringing La Bamba back home, right? That was the whole concept. So then we had that arrangement, and we're like, oh, let's just record it. And then we, again, for this album, we invited my good friend Ramon Gutierrez from Veracruz, and he's playing electric guitar this time on that one.
So that was all recorded, I'm assuming, live, singing, playing at the same time.
Yes.
That reminds me of, I did a session with my dad when I was 15 years old did you ever hear the song La Minifalda de Reinalda? You know that one? It was a big hit in 65, I think, about mini skirts.
Yep.
And it was kind of humorous. But anyway, it was so wonderful because it was my teenage band, Mark and the Escorts, and a conjunto Arellano. And it was a button accordion. It was a Tejano type of a group. And we were both set up, and we did this record live, both bands side by side, with my dad singing live. So
Nice.
what you hear on the record was done live in one take, and it started out with the conjunto, and my dad singing like a Tejano type song, the verse, and then Pero Reinalda, Reinalda, and then we come in, quítate su minifalda, and we rocked out, and boom, and then the other band comes in, and then we come back in, and it was all done at one time live, and boy, was that fun. And it's
Oh my God.
great record.
Sounds like a blast. Hell yeah.
Very creative though, to do stuff like that is.
But to us, it makes sense because we are all those things. We are all those things. It's not separate. It's all part of one idea and understanding for us. And we can navigate those spaces with fluidity and be really creative in those things. And it's like, again, this is what is so magical about us, right? Is our ability to do these things and to what Gloria Anzaldúa calls to live in the in-between, right?
In between and straddling both cultures, it's all there,
And many cultures, like Black culture.
Yeah, and beyond, yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. Okay, so that was also Smithsonian Folkways. And then the 8th album, Justice Never Dies 2020, was that during the pandemic? What that's that about?
That's not an album, that's actually a single.
Oh, it's a single, okay.
Single. That's just a single. And that is during the pandemic. And that is a like apocalyptic type song. And it's saying, as the world ends around us, as others still fight and die, we're doing all we can. Embrace me now, I won't cry. Because even in the end, I feel strong by your side. As long as we have love, we're victorious, and justice never dies. right? And
Nice.
so then it goes back again. It says, In this new beginning," because it's like, oh, like, well, look, like everything has dissipated and we're still alive, you know. And then it says, "In this new beginning, I feel strong by your side." Uh, and again, as long as we have love, you know, we're victorious and justice never dies.
Very cool. In 2021, also in Smithsonian Folkways, Puentes Sonoros. What was the concept of that?
So the band took a band field trip to Veracruz. And this is the first time we do this as a band. Marta and I had done it many times. Juan had also been there. And so the band went together and we toured around the whole Jarocho region to see all of our friends and have them meet all of our friends and hang out and jam. Like we just jammed for days. And so we went around and it was like absorbing that energy and that vibe that we get so much from when we visit, right?
Yeah.
And so we came back and we composed songs based on that trip, and they're all written within, again, putting the parameters in, like they're all within like these jarocho rhythms. Harmonically, they're not, you know, like jarocho songs, um, but they have the instrumentation of them, right? And so like someone who doesn't know is like, oh, this sounds like traditional music, but it's actually very far from it. So it's just being creative with the actual form, the rhythmic form of jarocho music, utilizing the tarima, stomp box, right? The jaranas, the requintos, and then bass instruments and the jawbones and other percussion instruments and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's what this is about. It's about sonic bridges between us, right? And you know, if when we go to Mexico, our band is understood as belonging to that that whole scene, right? That network.
And have you played a lot in Mexico?
Yeah.
Have you gone down to the home of the Son Jarocho?
Oh, yeah. Like that's where we.
Veracruz. You go there
Yeah.
mostly.
Yep. My son now goes there. He when he turned 18, he was like, "Is it okay if I take a trip without you guys?" They're inviting me to go to the ranch and to one of the ranches where they're having a fandango. And a fandango is a fiesta that lasts all night long. They have them on special occasions. In this case, it was for the patron saint of that town, of that little village. It's actually a rancho. And so he went, he took off and he went, and they know him. They've known him since he was a little kid, and they're like, "Oh, you stay with us," and they take care of him, and you know, so it's a thing. It's family.
Very nice, man. So we've done a couple of gigs together, I'd like to bring up. We did that thing at East L.A. College,
Mhm.
April 30th, 2009. It was to celebrate the release of the second edition of the Land of a Thousand Dances book by
Mhm.
Tom Waldman and David Reyes.
Yep.
And it was a reunion of my 70s band Tango.
Yep.
And we had three original members, myself, Ernie Hernandez on drums, and John Valenzuela on guitar. Our bass player, Rick Rosas, was playing with Neil Young at the time, so we had John's brother, Leo, play bass. You guys were on the bill, and also Lisa Flores.
Mhm.
Do you remember that show?
Of course, in the gym.
Yeah, in the gym. And a
Yep.
lot of East LA veterans were there, guys from El Chicano, the Midnighters. It was a really great event.
Yeah, it was beautiful. We also did well, there's a couple more. The one of the other ones I remember is the Autry with your pops.
Oh, you were at that too.
We played, you played as the escorts, and then your pops came on, you guys backed him up. And then we also played, yeah.
Was it the one that was at night?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, that was a beautiful. That was,
Courtyard.
and my dad was already. It was actually my band at the time was just called the Mark Guerrero Band,
Mhm.
and I think we did our show. Then my dad came up and we backed him up, and I think I did a little duo, just me and my dad, acoustic little session where we were kind of like the Smothers Brothers, and a
Yeah.
little comedy in between.
Yep.
But he was really getting up there in age by then. He wound up getting Alzheimer's,
Yep.
and so by then he was very forgetful. He had to be reminded of stuff, and I had to jump in once in a while musically for
Mhm.
him. But he was already like 85 or 86, and but he
Yeah.
still did a good show. People loved him.
I got to spend time with him backstage that day, and it was amazing. Yeah. He's really amazing. And I had spent time with him before, a couple times before, because there was a school named after him in Highland Park, the Lalo Guerrero School
Or
of
the
Music.
music school of some kind?
Park, Art in the Park, yeah.
Yeah.
And so she would do a fundraiser every year called the Corn Festival. And so one year we played, and Lalo was there, and so we got to back him up, and the Ozo guys were there too. We all got to back him up. It was so much fun, and so I got to hang out with him for several hours that day and actually just talk and ask him questions. And this is like 96 probably.
Oh, so he was still totally sharp back then.
Super sharp and fucking hilarious.
Oh, funny. What a character. Character.
So funny. Yeah, and
Did he do
really,
some of his parodies, his funny stuff too?
yeah, he did a bunch of stuff. Yeah, yeah,
Cool. And then we did the O'Donnell Golf Course out here in 2010
that's right.
for that
Yeah,
thing. It was called Fiesta Days,
yeah,
September of 2010.
yeah.
And Tierra El Chicano, the Blazers, my band, Cannibal Headhunters Band, Fabulocos. It was quite a musical festival there for Chicanos and
Right.
East LA veterans.
Jorge Santana was there. He was still alive.
Jorge Santana, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that. Now I happened to catch on YouTube. I'm not sure if it was on YouTube, but the other day I saw you guys. You were on that PBS Tiny Desk series. That was real
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
How'd you guys get involved with that?
You mean the NPR Tiny Desk?
Yeah. Oh yeah, NPR. Yeah, I said PBS. Yeah.
We did a PBS or KCT thing, which is called I forget what it's called. Juan Debbie's his thing. But anyways, but yeah, we did the Tiny Desk. That was incredible. That was really cool. Um, there's a guy named Felix. Oh shit, I'm blowing it today with these names. But anyways, uh, Felix Contreras. He's a DJ, or was. He retired, and um, and so he was like telling the Tiny Desk guy, "You got to have this band." So he let him curate a show, and so he brought us on, and we had been to DC tons of times because of the Folkways, and we had played, so many different venues. We also toured a bunch with Los Lobos over there, um, and other bands as well, and by ourselves. And so we had been to DC a lot, and so finally they put us on, and it was literally a tiny desk with a bunch of CDs behind us, and
And that was in Washington, D.C.
yeah, it's in
I didn't
DC.
know that. Is that where it's always taped?
Mhm,
I've seen a
mhm.
lot of people on there. It's
Oh
quite a
yeah, yeah.
show.
Yeah, it was, and then the whole staff was there, and so we just put on a show for them, and it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, you guys kicked butt too. And Martha was singing her butt off and
Yeah,
dancing on that percussion instrument. What's it called?
Arima.
She can hoof it too,
Oh, she is an incredible dancer, and also, yeah, she's just an incredible dancer.
and singer and performer.
Oh, for sure, all of it.
And just a few weeks ago, when I was a guest of Los Lobos on those three shows, Martha was up on stage dancing when I sang La 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 La.
Oh
She's
yeah,
dancing around, she's doing the twist.
yep.
She can move,
She's a dancer for sure. Yeah, we had a great time. I was actually talking about that to my uncle. My uncle Jose Joey, Miss Joey. He is one of the reasons why I really love music. Like he turned me on to Hendrix early on. He turned me on to a lot of the Beatles stuff. Like he was always putting on music for me. He'd make me sit there and he'd put it on and make me study it. And so he was like, I was like, yeah, Marta performed Los Lobos and blah, blah, blah. And Mark Guerrero was there and they did, the La 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 song. He's like, the Blandells? And I was like, yeah, yeah. He knew it right away, right? And so we started jamming on it there because, we always take a guitar to Christmas or whatever. And so we started jamming and it's so much fun, man.
I saw you at the Paramount. Did you go to all three shows?
I went to the two shows. I went to Garfield and the Paramount. I didn't go to the
The
Whiskey.
two East LA shows, baby.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was yeah, I thought the Garfield one went the
Yeah.
best for me anyway, because we had done it three times and it really kicked ass and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
really, really fun.
All of them to me are just like it's just so much fun, watching those guys, but watching everybody get on stage. You, Marta, Willie, little Willie, everybody. just it to me it invokes so much pride at a time where the identity, the Chicano identity is under fire, is is being made to seem or feel irrelevant when it's so relevant in so many ways. I can tell you that when I went to the Cheech for the first time and I stepped out and I saw the big sign that said, you know, Cheech Marin Center for Chicano and Chicano Art and Culture, it brought tears to my eye. It was so emotional because I grew up in this community. I grew up in this culture. I know what it means, right? And to also understand that there have been some people who have misused it and who have hurt other people in the process, you know, utilizing this identity as more of like a nationalist construct, and that's not what it is. You know, it's so much more than that. And so to me, you know, there's a great sense of pride and joy and yeah, and excitement that I get watching you all perform or getting to perform in any time, you know?
Yeah, coincidentally, I was at the Cheech for the first time yesterday.
Oh,
I
wow.
just went yesterday, and it was fantastic. I mean, I've always felt this since the late 60s, early 70s, that these Chicano artists are world-class artists, along with any world-class period in any country. Unbelievable art, great artists. And to be presented in such a classy way there is just so fantastic. And I knew personally half the artists because I grew up with them. The art and the music community has been pretty close. At least I've been close to the art community.
Yep.
And it was really incredible. And I ran into Ignacio Gomez there, the
Oh,
artist.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, hell yeah.
he did the famous the Pachuco poster for Zoot Suit. He did one of my album covers on the Boulevard, and just happened to run into him. And it was quite an experience. Yeah,
That's great.
fantastic. So I think we covered mostly everything. Is there anything that we missed that you'd like to talk about? And I saved a few things for Martha's interview. If Martha does it, she can cover more of some of the academic stuff that we left out and some of the other programs. Maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we could talk for days,
Oh, absolutely. But is
but
there
no,
anything in particular
I
you'd
feel like
like to bring up?
no, I mean, I just think like, you know, watching bands like La Santa Cecilia, um, you know, Irene Diaz, artist, right? This is young. Santa's not that much younger than us, but they are younger than us. Just
And they
watch.
came out a lot way later than you, as
Yeah,
far
yeah,
as.
yeah. And so to me is also so gratifying and exciting, and I'm always listening, I'm always watching, and yeah. Oh, there is something I want to mention. So Soho Graphics hit me up last year and asked me if I wanted to do an atelier, a print series on the '90s scene, music scene, because it was so connected to self-help in so many ways. You know, this is the first time they opened their doors to music again after the Vex.
Yes, yes.
That whole thing, right? And so uh, we have a deep connection to self help. So we decided to do a print series. So I invited one musician from each of the sort of core bands that I mentioned earlier, and then I'm a part of the atelier as well. And then I invited 8 artists from that era, visual artists, and I put them in pairs, and each one had a conversation, and the artist is creating a print based on that conversation. The musician is creating a song and recording the song, and each song lyric will be also printed. So you'll have 2 prints as part of a pair, and then you're going to have the song on a QR code, and you can listen to it while you look at the piece. And so that's going to be in March at Plaza de la Raza. We're going to do the whole release.
Fantastic. Let's talk about that venue for a second. When I was really young, it was the CYO Hall,
Uh-huh.
Catholic Youth Organization. And one of the first gigs the Escorts, my first band, played was there. I mean, 1963, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
And we played there a lot in the mid 60s. And it was a happening venue. All the East L.A. bands would play there. And there'd be a lot of fights. We'd be playing and chairs would be flying sometimes and keep
Sure.
playing. Um, But the CYO, then it turned into self-help graphics, and then it went through that punk period with the Vex.
Yeah.
And then what you're talking about in the 90s, but also in the 90s, there was this, I don't know if you were aware of it, but there was a little program there for a little while where every week they'd bring in a Chicano artist from East LA and they'd play and talk. Did you see some of that? I went there with my dad. My dad and I did one of them.
Amazing.
Cannibal, the original Cannibal the Headhunters did one. Did you see some of those?
I didn't see any, but
Did you
I
know
know.
about it?
Yeah,
Yeah, so that happened. So that thing has been a centralized hub of a lot of the East LA history
for,
throughout the decades, that building.
for sure. Yep. Oh man. Yep. So exciting stuff. Oh, the last thing I'll say is that in January of last year, we finally, after 20 years of talking about it, we did an album with Dave Hidalgo. And so uh, there was a lot of things were happening. Our bass player Juan, his mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Um, our violinist Aunt Mary is in her 90s,
Mhm.
is very lucid. We were hanging around a lot with Ofelia Esparza. She's an altar maker, brilliant altar maker, and one of the reasons why we have Dia de los Muertos in East LA so firmly implanted. And and she's in her 90s as well. And then we had David, and some stories that he told about his brother and his brother's memory, and so we decided to do an album about memory, and it's called Memory and Return, right? And so it's both like the loss of memory and that sort of thing when people struggling with these different diseases and stuff like that, but it's also the retention of memory and the elders and how much like Ophelia has intact, like old East LA and Fisher Street and the duplex adobe that she lived in, and like the church, like dirt streets, like the whole thing, right? And so we got into a studio, and Dave brought his electric guitars, and they had Marta. I just produced it. I didn't play a lick on it, which I'm a little bit conflicted about, because I've been dying to record something with Dave. It'll happen at some point. But I produced it. And
So what
so
would this album be? Would it be a Quetzal album or what would it be?
no, it's just called Memory and Return. And
And is there, who's named as the artist? Anybody on it?
it's going to name all of them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's our violinist, our bass player. So Juan, Tailana, Marta, Dave, and then Sandino, my son, and then Ofelia Esparza telling stories
Hmm.
on the album.
So it's all recorded, but it hasn't been released yet?
Yeah, it's mixed. It's gonna get mastered second week of January, and then we're gonna print albums.
You do some vinyl too?
It's vinyl, just
Just
vinyl, vinyl and digital. Yeah.
very cool.
So
Um, so once again, one of the things that drives my work to want to document the history of East LA rock is because I'm so proud of it. You know, how many people, how many great musicians have come out of there, how many have succeeded in so many ways, commercially, artistically, socially. And the fact that it's gone on from, pretty much the early 60s till today, there's always been a scene, there's always been great musicians, kinds of different genres, but and then it goes hand in hand with the art. I'm so proud of that East LA creativity and scene that has just gone on nonstop. It's phenomenal how many bands, artists, singers, musicians. It's phenomenal, and to be a part of that history is incredible. How do you feel about being part of that whole time frame?
I mean, I claim it. I belong to something. I belong to a tradition. I belong to a traditional community, right? This shit's going on 100 years consistently, decade after decade, just like this output of information
Right,
of like I mentioned earlier, the output of our, like, it's the sonic manifestation of our lived realities as Chicano people
right.
and
So
our
like I'm
connection.
saying, the early 60s is basically rock and roll. It probably obviously went before that with the traditional and every other kind of music.
Whatever it was, like, it's still a part of us and who we are, and how we were experiencing life in this crazy world. And so, man, like you know, I listen to my son's music, and it is so powerful, and it's you hear it. You hear the black traditions in there because he's totally influenced by it, and he's in that proximity with black people. And then you hear the son jarocho, you hear the like like the doo-wop. He loves doo-wop music, and so he has an incredible falsetto. And you hear you know all of the different traditions that he's been exposed to in his life, and how with great facility he can manage these things to create a message, to create a moment for people to experience. So his album's going to come out. He's going to release an EP sometime in the first quarter of the year. So the tradition continues. I did my job.
And the beat goes on.
Yep. It
As
certainly
Sonny Bono
does.
once said.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
man. Well, cool, man. So thanks for being a guest, man. It's a great show. Thank you.
My brother, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
See you next time, man. Take care.